His name's Phil.
And his name's Tim.
And this is Tim and Phill Talk About Games.
A podcast where Tim and myself get together and talk about games we've recently played and discuss topics in the world of gaming.
This week on the podcast, we'll spend way too much time theory crafting strategies, flaming trolls, and then blaming the forum moderators as we step into the wonderful world of gaming communities.
That is right. We'll be asking what makes gaming communities so important, what they provide players, and how their fickle nature can both help and hinder developers. Yay! We're back. We are back.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Let us just go straight into things because we are ready. We're prepped. We're good to go.
Rearing to go.
We just got a quick couple of announcements to start the show. We have a shout out for a person on Facebook that we can't actually tell the identity of.
We can't tell what your name is.
Unfortunately, we had one person like us on Facebook. Thank you, that person. We don't know who you are because you're very private.
You do though. You know who you are.
You know who you are.
And we love you.
Exactly. You know how important you are. We thought after having done so many different topics on, so many podcasts on different topics, we thought we'd just maybe start at for a couple of minutes at the start of each episode, just talk about games we've recently played, because we haven't really done that for a while. So yeah, Tim, what have you been playing?
I had been playing a lot of Dungeons of the Endless with you and Pat. Great game, even better in multiplayer. Very, as far as roguelikes go, it's certainly one of the ones that I've had the most fun with. And then, Homeworld Remastered came out, and everything else can go get fucked. Because I am a huge Homeworld fan, massive Homeworld fan. In fact, I very nearly had the Angel Moon tattooed on the back of my neck at one point, but the Morrowind logo went out, so...
It can still happen, man.
Yeah, no, it still can. It very much still can. And I've got to say that, I'll probably be dedicating an entire short video to this later on, but the game truly is the first remastering of a legacy game that I've seen so far that I feel has succeeded. It is so incredibly accurate to the original games. The original voice actors, the original music, everything has been redone. Again, this is a long story, but the point is that the result is something that I am actually really proud of and really excited about. And also seems to be pretty popular in the Homeworld communities, which is something I'm sure we'll cover later on in this episode.
Yay! Yes,
what about you?
Absolutely. Well, as you said, we've been playing Dungeon of the Endless. It's a really cool game. I actually really dig it. I'm not sure how much of my love for the game just comes from being really jealous of how good their pixel art is.
It's so good!
Really good. I also just like the fact that, the cooperative, and I would say the best way to experience the game is probably through multiplayer, because it kind of feels... It feels really quite like a cooperative board game in a sense. Like you have to place
that's a really good point. It kind of does, doesn't it?
Yeah, the way that you place your players to secure different areas and stuff, like you really have to. It felt a lot like playing the board game Pandemic, which is a co-op game where you have to basically stop an infection from breaking out in the world. It plays very kind of similar to that, but obviously with all the real time and the stats tracking and the RPG elements that a video game can provide. Other than that, I started playing Antichamber just today because it's on my 2015 pile of games that I want to finish.
Such a good game.
Yeah, it's really pretty good so far. Bit of a mind screw.
I gotta say that if this is on your list of games that you will finish, like by the end of this year, I have some bad news for you.
Well, part of the push for me for 2015 is to finish games. So if I get stuck on anything, I've given myself full permission to just go cheat and look at the internet. So I won't feel great about it, but still,
it is a really hard game. I know. I mean, I started playing it years ago when it came out.
I know, and, that's the thing. This has been on my pile. Like, this has been in my Steam library for multiple years, and I just have never gotten around to it.
I did. And I got 2/3 of the way through it, and I can't finish it. It's just, I guess one of the interesting parts of that game as well is that you get to a point where you're not really sure where you're meant to go next because of the non-Euclidean geometry of the whole game, which is its charm. I mean, I love it. But because of that, you're never really sure, like, oh, where was I?
Yeah. Anyway, so that's been on my list of things to finish for quite a while. I mean, we included in our PAX talk, so I felt really bad for not actually having played it. So yeah, that's other than that, just Heroes of the Storm every now and again. Although, yeah, I've really gone cold on that. I don't like the way it reminds me of how I used to feel when I played Counter-Strike, and
it reminds me of the time I used to do heroin.
Almost, man. It gets you all stressed and angry, and I'd much rather be doing something else.
Just like the heroin.
Just like the heroin, exactly, the roids and everything. So yeah, that's pretty much what we've been playing. So we just thought, give you an update on some cool games that we've been enjoying and that kind of stuff at the start of each episode, before we dive into the topic, which can get pretty heavy and sometimes pretty abstract. So yeah.
Also a good way to keep track of your little project of how you are going in terms of completing all your games. And what we can do is we can get the entire community to kick you up the arse and say, hey Phil, remember how you were going to finish that game this week? How come you haven't finished it, Phil? Huh?
Well, I have a list of 66 games, I think, that I'm meant to finish by the end of 2015.
Wow, you realise that there are less weeks in the year than that.
I'm very, very, very aware. Some of the, well,
I don't know how many there are in a year, but
yeah,
I'm sure it's less than 66. It's like, it's in the 50s.
And, well, it's made even worse by the fact that I've only finished one so far. So, I'm not saying I'm going to finish everything in 2015. I just want to make a really good crack at it.
Fair enough.
Not crack at it, but crack at it. Anyway, so on to this week's, or this fortnight's, or this X time period's discussion, which is communities. So we thought that we'd talk about communities, not necessarily in the sense of like what makes a good community and what makes a bad community, although that will
certainly be a part of it.
Exactly, but more with regards to how developers and how publishers are going about it nowadays, because it seems like building a community, or at least having a community engage with your game, is pretty much inevitable nowadays, and also it's
almost necessary.
Exactly, it's almost necessary for most games to actually succeed, especially now that we've seen a lot of different funding models come out that actually rely on communities being built. So yeah, we just thought we'd take a dive into that kind of topic, and I guess we should probably outline kind of the different ways in which companies develop communities and how they rely on communities, because there are a number of different ways in which you can build a community. I mean, it's not an exact science. It's not like you say, you know, X amount of money plus Y amount of social media equals profit.
Although, sometimes.
Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But there are many different companies and many different developers that are doing things.
One of those del functions in there, isn't there?
Mm. I think so, yeah. So yeah, I guess you have been part of a pretty massive community for the past 2 years on a game that is not even out yet. And Tim assured me that he would be able to talk for forever on this topic because it has something to do with Star Citizen. So I guess I just wanted to ask, how do you think it is that Star Citizen has managed to build such a massive community, and how, firstly, if you could, I guess, explain to people, or explain to the listeners, how they've gone about building their community, and how you think, or why you think it's been so successful?
The first thing the most important thing with Star Citizen is the fact that there is no publisher involved. Because it's a Kickstarted game, so first of all, Kickstarted game. Mm-hmm. Secondly, once it was kickstarted, the crowdfunding didn't stop. It continued on the website, so you have a continuous ability to rake in ridiculous amounts of money. I'm pretty sure this week was the $74 million goal. So, I mean, they've already stated that they're absolutely certain they're going to have 100 million by the end of the year. And I would even hazard a guess that 100 million will be before September at this rate. Like it's going to be quite big quite quickly.
So the way that they do their model, if people don't know, is that they started this Kickstarter. It got a lot of attention. It got a lot of press because it was Chris Roberts, who was the maker of the original Wing Commander games, all that kind of stuff. So it had a lot of prestige going into it. But then since the Kickstarter finished, and it finished at some ludicrously high amount for the time, I should say. Since then, they've continued raking in the crowdfunding by releasing different ship models. So the way that they've worked it is that you don't buy the game per se, you buy the ability to use a particular ship in the game.
See, I would almost disagree with that, because the model is very much that you're pledging, what you're doing is you're donating towards the game. And as a result, you get the opportunity to unlock a ship earlier than other people. But you're not, I mean, when you say you're buying a ship, you are also not, like, everything that you can pledge towards is earnable in the game.
Oh yeah, I didn't mean to say that. Yeah, that you can't get it otherwise. I'm just saying, like, when you, it's not like you go to the Steam store and say, buy this game. It's more like you choose which ship you would like to
sort of begin the game with, sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And the bigger ships require a lot more money, but they also require more people as well. So it's not exactly an easy run where you can just be like, all right, I'm going to sink $200 into this game and win at everything forever. Because you do need, and this again ties back into it, you do need a good community of people to fly those ships with you. A lot of these bigger ships have crew of up to sort of 30, 40 people in some of these larger ships, which is ridiculous.
It's insane.
I can't get 30 people just to come to a single LAN party and play the same game.
I can't get 30 people to come to a normal party, let alone a LAN party.
So, the community is really, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy with Star Citizen, because first of all, everyone who's a part of the community has been a part of this crowdfunding, kickstarted sort of ride, this journey that everyone's been on. So, there's this, I mean, first of all, this monetary sort of binding between the various community members. But on top of that, they've got a very, very open production model. And there have been, I mean, I literally cannot count the number of times that the community have brought something up with the development of the game. And the developers have turned around and gone, hey, that's really interesting. We hadn't thought about that. And so they've changed something in the game. And not even just little things. So, yes, this happens in terms of, like, you know, ship X is too powerful, or please nerf gun Y. But also in the fact that, like, about a year ago now, there was a very heavy focus in the development side of things on ship-to-ship combat. Right. Which you would expect, right? Combat is the biggest part of, I mean, let's face it, every single game that we play.
Yeah, exactly.
So what happened was that they put out a little poll saying, what are you the most excited about in the upcoming, you know, Star Citizen game? And the community resoundingly answered the poll with exploration. So, and we're talking like 85% of people replied with exploration. And the piracy and bounty hunting and dogfighting sort of came down there in the sort of 30s and 40s, because you could select more than one object.
Multiple objects, yeah.
And so they went, whoa, hang on. You guys want to explore? We thought you wanted to fight. And they're like, well, we want to fight, but we also really want to explore. And they're like, all right, well, that changes how we're gonna go about the development. And what they did was they then put this massive focus on exploration. And now exploration is one of the largest parts of the game and the most fleshed out parts of the game. So it fosters a community, not just when you're listening to things like, you know, I like this character, or I wish this part of the game was easier. But when people say, hey, I really enjoy doing this one thing in the game, and they say, all right, we're gonna flesh out an entire mechanism just to facilitate the thing that people seem to want to play. That sends a really positive, strong vibe back into the community. It's saying, hey, we're listening to you, and we really want to make the game that you want to play. We don't want to make the game that, you know, will sell copies. We want to make the game that you want to play and that we want to play.
I guess the thing with that, I mean, obviously the group at Star Citizen, or whatever they're called, Robert Space Industries,
Cloud Imperium Games.
Cloud Imperium Games, there you go. Obviously they're handling it kind of pretty well, although they could be accused of feature creep somewhat in the way that they're developing the game, but they seem to be doing okay in terms of involving the community and that kind of stuff. I think there is certainly a danger, if not with them, but with other companies, maybe smaller companies that can't, I guess, devote more people to that kind of stuff. Like, that wouldn't be that able to just take the input from the community and, like, do a 180. And if they did do that, then maybe it would kind of... I guess the more feedback that you get from the community, the harder it is to stick with your original vision, is what I'm trying to get at.
And I think that it's also really important that people shouldn't when I say people, I mean developers, they shouldn't compromise their artistic integrity. They shouldn't compromise the game that they wanted to make just because people have said. I mean, because you're always going to get squeaky wheels and you're always going to get loud people going, yeah. And I think that as soon as you start saying, all right, well, we were going to make a game where you mined cube blocks of things, but you guys wanted Call of Duty, so we're going to make Call of Duty instead. Like, you can't go that far. You can't just completely throw away your ideas. And then, certainly, and against the guys at Star Citizen have been doing this as well. People have said, hey, wouldn't it be better if you did this? We want to see this feature instead. And they've gone, we don't care. You're demonstrably wrong with your opinion on this one. Like, if you want to play that game, you need to play a different game. Yeah. You need to not be playing this one.
But I have a feeling that some developers don't do that, and that's when I think that's when communities can be a double-edged sword. Is when you do have this vocal majority or vocal minority, I should say, that do suggest things or complain things or trash the game, or it's like the Yelp review for a restaurant, right? If Yelp reviews start coming up negative and suggest complaining about things, you're going to want to address them and change them to positive, even though they may not be true to the style of the restaurant. Like, if someone comes to your restaurant and goes, your French restaurant, and says, I want spaghetti, there's no spaghetti here, I really like spaghetti, you're like, well,
why aren't you serving it?
Exactly, why have you come to a French restaurant? But it kind of feels like there's a few it kind of feels like anecdotally there has been a few examples of companies that have tried to accommodate that customer.
It's like,
in their game.
I went to a really, really good steak place once, and I went with people, and one of them was like, I really want my steak very well done. Like, I want it pretty much charred on the outside. Yeah. And they're like, I'm sorry, the most done we do is medium. We don't do anything beyond medium. They're like, but you have to, because I'm the customer, and the customer is always right. And they're like, yeah, well, we also sell high quality steaks, and if we overcook them, like, you are doing you a disservice. You need to eat, like, if you wanted a charred piece of meat, then you should have gone to McDonald's, because that's not what we do here. So you do very much need to hold to your gun. You need to know when to hold to your guns, and when to
engage with
bend.
The community. Yeah,
I'm sure there's a Zen Cohen in here somewhere about the about the reeds that bend with the wind, but don't bend too far, otherwise they break. And
yeah, that sounds good. Let's go with that.
Yeah, I'm the worst.
Be
Buddhist,
the reed. Be the reed. Well, okay, so we touched on developers that may not be able to have the agility that the Star Citizen people do. I have a feeling
we've seen this as well. We've seen developers go under because of this. And I frustratingly didn't look this up beforehand because I didn't really think about going down this avenue. But I can think of two specific Kickstarters where the games themselves have completely failed, and they've had to just say, "Hey, we're giving up. We can't do it," because
Godus, I think.
Godus is another good example. I mean, we're getting on the topic of Peter Molyneux, which is an entire podcast by itself.
Yeah, that kind of goes into Peter Molyneux-ification, and we don't want to go down that road. But I think also... Just
to be fair, I really love Peter Molyneux.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I know that you're not so hot on him.
Well, every industry needs its eccentric, but, black and white.
I love him. I love him so much.
That's all I have to say about this, black and white.
I love black and white.
No, no one did. Anyway,
I did. I like the ending to Mass Effect.
Yeah.
I liked the second Matrix movie, Phil.
Not the third, hopefully.
No, I love the third movie. I like all three of the movies.
Good God, you're awful.
Yeah.
I think Godus is one of the ones where they're basically at the moment saying, and they got a lot of backlash against it, basically saying they can't. Then they're probably not going to be able to deliver on the original promise. And Peter Molyneux got that horrible interview, which was really disrespectful, and I didn't exactly enjoy about
him. Oh, the one on Rock Paper Shotgun?
I think so, yeah. It was pretty awful.
That was really awkward.
Yeah, regardless, I think Godus and Space Base DF9 is, I think, the other one that you probably think about.
It wasn't, but that is another one.
Yeah, exactly. Where it happens that the communities are basically not getting what has been promised, and how much of that is the community's fault, whether or not they did provide feedback that caused feature creep, but I think sometimes it's just
the community thinks that they've been promised something that they were never promised in the first place. Or the community makes the promise to themselves, and then the developers are like, wait, we have to what now?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess that's the risk of using something like Kickstarter or Greenlight or Early Access or whatever. Like, there are, definitive statements, terms of services that say you are not guaranteed to get. Like, there's a certain amount of honesty that you have to have with your Kickstarter, otherwise you get, slap on the wrist. I actually really don't know what the terms of service of setting up Kickstarter are.
They were certainly at the time when all this was really happening, like when the crowdfunded game was having its real sort of resurgent peak sort of thing. Actually, not resurgent because it's the first time, so I guess surgent. They didn't really have a very good terms of service, and that was a big problem because a lot of companies started doing things and then not delivering. Then like, well, how do we sort of go through with this? And so they've updated it now, but it's still very much done on a code of honor of we will do our best to make it. But that's why they have the risk section in the bottom, is to say, look, these are the risks associated with the project. If we, come into some of these problems, they might not be resolvable, and then the money that you've given us, kind of a moot point. Like, we spent it, we can't give it back to you.
Yeah. But I guess, so, moving away from kind of disgruntled players and kind of the risks that a community can kind of both assume and also kind of pose to a developer, I kind of wanted to talk about the way that games. It used to be that, and we were talking about this before we started recording. It used to be that games were released, and marketing was done for them. But really, you played the game, you finished the game, you maybe talked to someone in the schoolyard or someone that you knew about it at work or whatever. But that was kind of it. Like, there wasn't this huge push to create games that people played over like years, which there seems to be now. Like, you have all of the tools there to build a community for any game. Like, you have YouTube, you have streaming using Twitch, Twitch or any of the other random streaming services, mostly Twitch.
There are other ones.
Yeah, there's like a whole bunch of really random ones, and they're just doing it wrong. You have to download clients and stuff like that. It's really stupid. They've got forums have been around forever, chat like Skype and all that kind of stuff have been around for a while now, and it's making it easier than ever for people to form communities. And I think that developers and publishers are actually starting to really try and take advantage of that and create ways in which games, a single release or even a single IP, but also just a single release can be played for years rather than hours.
Yeah.
You see this obviously. The main example that you would probably talk about is in esports, where you have very, very well-defined games such as Dota, League of Legends, Counter-Strike. These are games that the mechanics have been the same forever, ever since they were released. But it's the way in which they invest in the community that means that the games can continue to grow and evolve slowly, very, very slowly in some cases, and kind of really, really build these massive communities that then sustain it through, the pretty clever marketing techniques that they've used to generate money, usually through cosmetic enhancement, if you want to call it that.
Bit of Botox around the lips.
Yeah, exactly. A bit of Botox around AK-47. It's skins for guns.
Is that a euphemism, Phil?
I don't really know. Skins for guns in Counter-Strike, buying heroes in LoL, or buying cosmetics in Dota. These are all ways in which you can lever, like, if you can build a big enough community, you don't need, as a developer or a publisher, you don't need to publish more than one game. You can just publish the same game and just keep on, building, like, investing in that community rather than investing in another game. And you have to think that they're investing millions of dollars into building these communities, because every time they attract one person to the game, that's potentially one person that is going to play for years and therefore probably at some point or another put at least the cost of a new game into the game through these cosmetic enhancements. So I guess I also wanted to talk about like other ways in which, like, that's a relatively obvious one, right? And we've all played esports.
The thing that interested me was this one as well, and this is because I don't play a lot of the esports types games because
sure,
I can't be fucked. I cannot be fucked putting that much time and effort into a game where I know that I'm never going to be competitive, or certainly not competitive to a level that I would be happy with, because of my own ridiculously exacting standards. I don't find playing the low to middle sort of casual game particularly fun in these games. I've never enjoyed LOL. I've never enjoyed HOTS or HONS or whatever other acronym kids are using these days. I never even really enjoyed the Counter-Strike on the competitive side of things either. So looking at it from that point of view is really interesting. But when that kind of community starts to filter into games that don't have that long-term esports kind of mentality, that's when it starts to get really strange for me. A good example, I think, is, first of all, the idea of building a community and putting a lot of money and time and effort into building a community for a single-player game is pointless. With a couple of small exceptions. One big exception would be if you have a mod sort of community, like Kerbal Space Program has a huge and very, almost cult religious level of community. But when you look at a game like, for example, Mass Effect 3 or Dragon Age Inquisition, the two most recent ones from BioWare, they both had these multiplayer aspects they were really, really pushing to get people playing a lot of. But these games these are multiplayer games that only really exist inside the narrative of the single player. And as soon as people stop playing the single player, no one is going to be playing the multiplayer anymore. And so it confuses me in a way, because they're taking this esports mentality that you would get with games like Heroes of the Storm and applying it to a multiplayer facet of a single player game. First of all, because the worst part of it is that it works, right? Because it draws me, and I'm like, ooh, I have to log into Inquisition this week because they're having the multiplayer weekend with double XP. But ultimately, this is meaningless, because in 3 weeks, I can guarantee you I'm not going to be playing the multiplayer anymore, because it's very limited and borderline facile at points. So, I don't know, what's your idea on this? In my opinion, I think it would be better if they literally save that for an entirely separate game, like make a BioWare multiplayer-only game and do it on that sort of side of things.
Well, I think the single-player communities are just fundamentally different. Or even just, single-player and multiplayer cooperative games, when communities build around them, it's usually to enjoy the game. I don't know if that makes sense. You're kind of... It's because you love the setting, or you love the mechanics, or you love the emergent narratives. In the case of, the former in the case of Dragon Age, obviously a lot of people would congregate around those large series where they can inhabit the setting and, write fan fiction and...
Like they're playing the single player together.
Exactly. It's like any other media, like when you're reading a fantasy book and someone else is reading the same fantasy series or something like that, and you're like, oh, have you gotten up to the bit with blah? Oh, no, I haven't yet. What's going on there? Blah, blah, blah. Whereas with games, that can be an insane amount of discussion can be generated through that, because there's so many different ways in which to introduce choice, and the way that you go about things produces emergent narratives and that kind of stuff. But even in a game as simple as Binding of Isaac, which recently has seen... I'd say recently, probably within the last year, has seen just a huge, definitely resurgence in this case.
Well, they re-released it.
Yeah, exactly. They re-released it, and with that came, just a massive surge in the number of people that are playing it and streaming it. It's a roguelike game. It's got a pretty cool art style and all that kind of thing, but it's not like they've dedicated a whole lot of time to the story. I say that with all due respect to the person who created it, who I know that there is a deeper story to the game. I'm very aware of where it came from and how he created it. But in terms of comparison to Dragon Age Inquisition or whatever, we're not talking about a particularly involved linear narrative here. It's a procedurally generated game, and there's still massive communities forming around this to essentially challenge themselves to different things, like get through the game in a particular way, or making speed runs, all that kind of stuff. But it's so interesting to me that a community can form around such a simple game, such a massive community can form around such a simple game, to the same extent as something like a Dragon Age or a Mass Effect, where...
See, in my mind, it almost makes more sense when it's a simple game. I think it's like one of those things where you've got like a plot, like a U plot, where I think so. Like at the low end of things, you have like high amount of community engagement on very, very simple games, and then as the games get more and more complex, you get lower engagement, and then there's a turnaround. And as they get super complex, like Eve or something, you have this huge amount of community engagement because there's so much, again, on the theory crafting side of things. But on the really, really simple games, I mean, think of some of the biggest, not necessarily esport followings, but like sporty type followings of games. I mean, you've got things like Pac-Man and Donkey Kong and Tetris, like really basic, old school, simple games. And back at the time, they were about as complex as games could be. But even now, they have huge communities following these things because of their simplicity, because there's a very low bar to entry, and it's like one of those easy to play, lifetime to master style chess things.
Yeah. But I just think it's interesting. Like, they've got to be like, a bunch of random simple games out there on Steam or whatever, but they just haven't had the success that something like Binding of Isaac has, in terms of just sheer amount of people that are engaged with it is just really impressive.
I think as well, it's the setting. Like, you really need to grasp people with the setting of a game. Binding of Isaac has, I think, because first of all, it's the Meat Boy guy.
Yeah, exactly. Like, they already had a pretty big community thanks to Meat Boy.
Yeah, and you can sort of port that across. But then also on top of that, the Meat Boy had that the Meat Boy, Super Meat Boy. Give it its proper title.
Yeah.
Super Meat Boy had a very irreverent, gross out humor type sort of setting, and Binding of Isaac is the opposite in terms of irreverence. It's very everent. Reverent. There we go.
I wouldn't say that. There's like poo and stuff.
No, but it's still facile humor. But it's no longer irreverent in terms of the comedy. Super Meat Boy was like, oh, it's a guy made of meat. He gets ground up on things, and like it's fun and whimsical. Whereas Binding of Isaac is dark and terrifying.
It is,
and
it's
super critical
twisted.
of the being brought up in a Catholic lifestyle.
Yeah.
But it's still got that sort of gross out sort of humor to it. It's got that. I mean, part of it is certainly irreverent in terms of the types of power-ups that you can sometimes get can be a little bit sort of whimsical. But that kind of setting draws people in because it's bizarre and it's fun to talk about. Everyone likes to throw things at poo, so that works as well, I'm sure. I think the setting in terms of getting that initial seed of a community is super important.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, like for example, you can look at any number of the goddamn zombie movies, zombie games even, and movies that have come out recently. I mean, DayZ came out and everyone was like, holy crap, this is really something. And then there are now like 5 different DayZ clones out there between H1Z1 and
War Z.
World War Z and Z. Like there are so many other ones out there that are trying to capitalize on the pre-existing community. It's like those community vampire games that jump in and try and sort of capitalize on that market. But the funny thing is, a lot of those games have done really poorly because they are too much on the capitalizing side and not enough on the community fostering side. When you look at
well, that's the thing is that those type of games, like the sandbox games that you're talking about, they live and die on community. They're the people that should be doing everything they possibly can to keep the community on their side, like open dev diaries, giving away keys to streamers to get them engaged. All that kind of stuff needs to happen for them to succeed. Otherwise, what's the point of a sandbox if there's only one person playing in it?
Exactly.
It's pointless.
So the other thing is that then you've also got games like, for example, Guns of Icarus, which isn't an esport by any stretch of the imagination because the community's it's not big enough and it's not really sort of that well known as well. It doesn't have a pre-existing community. They were kickstarted. They didn't. These guys came out of nowhere with no resources or anything. They're not really a well-known IP. I mean, they're steampunk, which is a setting that everyone sort of, likes to get on. But they didn't really. I mean, they never really pushed the steampunk side of things. It's certainly what the game's set in, but they haven't gone, oh, look at us, we're steampunk. They've just sort of gone, this is the world that we're playing in, and it happens to have these things that are powered by steam, post-apocalyptic sort of steam machines and dirigibles, but for some reason, the game really sort of shot off on its own without needing any sort of, heavy marketing or this or that. It's one of the truly viral games in the sense that the Kickstarter went viral. They got a lot of money on the initial sort of run, although not as much as they really needed to get the game to the level they wanted it at. But now, again, because of things like open dev diaries, the devs regularly playing, I mean, that makes a huge, huge difference with Guns of Icarus.
Yeah.
The devs are always in the game, and they've got, little red text names or gold text names, I forget which it is now. But when you jump into a game and you see one of the lead developers playing with you, you're like, huh, that's pretty cool. And that gets people coming back in. Having small competitions here and there helps, but I think certainly just having that very down-to-earth, walking amongst the people sort of attitude to the development has a huge difference in terms of fostering a community like that. Yeah,
for sure. Absolutely. So moving away from games, there's been a term thrown around recently that I wanted to kind of explore, probably as our last kind of community engagement from games, which is the thought of games as a service, which is something that's kind of come out more and more lately. So what presumably other people mean by this, and what I've come to understand, is that, as we said before, it used to be that games were released, you played through them, took you 20, 30, 40 hours, whatever, you finished them, and, maybe you had an attachment to the publisher from playing that game, maybe you looked out for sequels, but, it wasn't like you kept playing that game. Nowadays, obviously, you have, like, DLC's been around forever, ways in which to keep you engaged with the game, ways in which to extend the game past just the, physical release date. But now it seems like a lot of games, or at least not a lot of games, but at least there's been a tendency towards games to release, but then maintain this schedule of building the game world and releasing DLC for way longer than just the few months or so that generally
One
you
might
saw.
argue way longer than they should.
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, so one good example is Borderlands. Borderlands 2, they released DLC for years after the game was released. Although,
in the case of Borderlands 2, all their DLC has been solid.
Yeah, it's always no. That's the thing, is that I'm not arguing against this or for it in general. I'm just it's something that we're noticing more and more, is that games will release. They release basically the engine that drives the game, and they release quite a large single player campaign or whatever, and then they use that engine and just keep adding DLC on it rather than releasing new IP. And it seems like it's something that it kind of speaks yet again to the kind of risk averseness of the industry. When you have people like Ubisoft or whatever, that just Ubisoft and Activision and etc., EA, etc., who just do this, the yearly cycle games. You got your Call of Duty, Assassin's Creed, FIFA, Madden, etc. These are very conservative games. Like, you pretty much know what you're getting into before you even load up the game. And I see that it's kind of moving out of just the massive developers that need their cash cows and into the kind of more independent developers, where it makes kind of sense for them to work really hard on a game engine and a game system, and then use that as a vehicle for them to keep producing content. And some of the content can be really, really high quality. One that I've heard of, I haven't played, that I've heard other people referring to with regards to this games as a service concept is Europa Universalis, which Europa Universalis 4, which recently went on sale on Steam, and when you
it's on sale every second week, to be quite honest.
I know, yeah, but when you click on it, you see just how many bits of DLC they've released since the game has been published proper. And apparently every single one of those is actually really pretty good and really influences how you play the game.
I mean, it's like a good 80%. Most of them are really high quality DLC.
And you can see on Steam, like it says, mostly positive, very positive, blah, 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 blah. So you can see that people are appreciating this. And it just seems like it's kind of it's a good way for independent or at least smaller developers to kind of be able to capture that, or not capture that, but they don't have to make as many risks if they kind of embrace this way of providing a game as a service. Now, obviously, you see larger developers doing it. You've got games like Diablo or Destiny or something like that, where they're releasing these games with the intention of maintaining the game for years.
It's almost the MMO model, but not quite.
It's almost that, but just not requiring the subscription, not requiring like the microtransaction. It's more like, we've given you this game. If you really like this game, here we are going to commit ourselves to releasing regular content updates for as long as people are going to want to buy them, basically. And it's just like, I encourage that. And with a game like Europa Universalis 4, it makes total sense. But with a game like Destiny, I'm not sure how long that community is going to stay engaged.
For Destiny, it's kind of, I mean, they were always billing Destiny as being an MMO. Having a console, can't exactly play it and tell you personally, but I follow a lot of people who do play it, and from everything that I can garner from the game, it's billed as an MMO, but it's not. I mean, it's more like Borderlands than an MMO, like Borderlands multiplayer with drop in, drop out sort of functionality. But yeah, it's this bizarre concept of being able to just continuously push out very small bits of content. Another game that does it as well is the Total War series. And I mean, so I have played a bit of Europa Universalis, but I've played a lot of Total War. And certainly, I mean, the most recent one, the second most recent one, which would be Rome 2, the most recent one being the sort of expansion, the full standalone expansion to Rome 2, which is Attila. All these games, they regularly bring out new faction packs, new small map areas. These are usually priced pretty well as well, at about sort of $2. I mean, $2 for an entire new faction to play is usually pretty good in my books, because a new faction, even though it'll only give you at most sort of 8 new units to sort of play with, a new faction will give you usually enough variation for me to get another 20-hour campaign in. And that's $2 for 20 hours. I mean, I'm sure there's maths involved, but it's a very small amount of dollars per hour.
That's right, but the thing is that this model wouldn't work if it wasn't possible, if communities hadn't become the focus, right? If communities didn't exist, and the ability for communities to band together, you know, through Steam, like discussions and all that kind of stuff, through YouTube playthrough, through Twitch streaming, all that kind of thing, if communities hadn't become such a massive thing in gaming, this would never work, because you would sell the game, they'd play it, they wouldn't care enough to keep up with it, and then you're trying to push DLC on them, they'll be like, nah, screw it, I'm gonna go and play something else. Whereas if someone's involved in the community and they see someone say, oh hey, new DLC's just come out, it's really good, you should play it, they go, oh yeah, you know, I'm still involved in this game.
That said, and I wouldn't say that I'm even remotely involved in the Total War community. I mean, I don't have a forum account or anything, I just really enjoy the game, and I see the thing pop up on Steam saying, hey, there's a new expansion for it, or a new faction, or even one time it was like, hey, we've added dogs now. You can recruit dogs to your army. And I was like, yes! Let's do it!
But it totally increases, it definitely increases the chance that you'll stay engaged with the game. Like, if you truly love the game, obviously there's nothing that's going to stop you from just playing it yourself and buy the DLC because you really love the game. But if you like the game and then you join the community and you meet a few people and you form those connections, there's way higher chance that you're going to go out and buy the game, and there's a way higher chance that you're going to convince other people to buy the game because you want to involve them in the community and kind of keep building on that big good group social feeling that has occurred,
like Star Citizen.
Exactly, and you know, come back to that because it's a good example.
I've recruited 8 people into it now.
I will crew your ship, Tim, yes.
Oh, you're definitely one of them, yeah. No, but I quite literally, I think, I'm just thinking back on it now, I think it's legitimately 8 people, separate people, like in different separate circles that I've talked to and be like, hey, this is a really good game, guys, you should totally get on this, it's gonna be so good, you should, guys, go seriously, come on, just, it's like $35 for the minimum pledge. It's fine. I can show you the website, and I can invite you to my guild afterwards, and it's gonna be a lot of fun. Like, I mean, yeah, don't look at this. This bit's a little bit dodgy at the moment, but it's gonna be really good. If you look at this video over here.
Yeah, no, it's very much. I think that communities have enabled that way of marketing a game and continuing to engage players. Obviously, it's not all sunshine and happiness. Like, sometimes
no.
It's
not even sunshine and happiness in Star Citizen.
Exactly. I mean, communities generate drama. I mean, that's kind of the thing. It's just that you need to manage it, or as a developer, they need to manage it so that it doesn't boil over into, massive hatred. Which has happened before.
It happens routinely.
All the time, yeah. And that's why they have a whole, I know you previously to starting the episode, you did say that Star Citizen doesn't have a massive, PR team, but companies like Blizzard, companies like Riot Games, they have whole teams devoted to this kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
Because they know how important it is to make sure the players are, at least think they're being heard, even if hearing them does nothing.
It's funny, actually. I was actually talking to one of the moderators on... I'm not going to say what game it was for. Yeah. But I used to be a moderator on a forum. I've moderated on several forums, but I was a moderator on one forum where I also had the full admin privileges to the bulletin board system that we were being used. And that's a spoiler. We were using bulletin boards, so that tells you how long ago this was. But when we had drama in that community, what I would do was I would not shadow ban people, which is a terrible way of going about it. As soon as you start banning people from communities, that's when you start feeding into the drama. Instead, I would start hiding all the drama causes posts. But then on top of that, I had set up a little cron that I could activate. And what that would do is that for a 40-hour period, it would randomly add page views to the troublemakers' posts. So they thought they were being read, but no one was responding. Because no one else could see these hateful posts or these troubling posts. People were just causing trouble for the sake of it. Various trolls and flame war starters. So they thought they were being viewed, but no one was responding to it. And the truth was that it was just because no one else could see their posts because they'd been hidden. And we had so little drama. It was fantastic. We never had a shortage of people posting crappy things, but if you were pretty quick on the mark, you could usually hide these posts before anyone had really sort of jumped on it. I mean, if I got found out, I was in deep shit. As soon as people see the Orwellian hand at play, I mean, that's when you start to create serious problems with your community, and you've soured the trust that you had with them. But it does work.
Well, that seems like it's kind of what it's all about, is building community. Yeah, there has to be trust. There has to be trust between the developer. In the case of a Kickstarter or a Greenlight or early access, there has to be trust between the player and the people that are developing or publishing the game, that they're going to get something that's good quality. In esports, there has to be trust between the player and the community more than the developer. Although equally, there has to be trust that you are going to get into the game and people are going to be trying to play the game with you. And also you need to trust that, the developer's not going to turn around and go, actually, we're going to nerf this, and this, and your whole game has changed and we don't...
And screw you all!
Yeah, exactly. And same as games as a service. If you're going to invest all that time in a game, you need to trust that the DLC and the way that they're supporting you and the way that they're, say, running their servers or, doing their events is going to be something that you're going to enjoy if you're going to put all this time into it. I guess, the best way to build a good community is based on trust, and don't screw that up.
Just like a real life relationship, the best way to foster it is through trust. Trust, openness, and communication.
Yeah.
That's all you need, Phil. That's all you need.
Exactly. In life, as in game communities.
And the Reddit-style voting system for your bulletin boards.
Yeah, that also works. It's pretty good.
If I could be so, big-headed to think that any developer is watching this right now, adopt a voting system for your forums.
Yeah, I think Starbound did that.
It solves so many problems. As soon as you start implementing crowd-sourced moderation,
Yeah.
The mob might be stupid, but all the quiet moderates are the ones that fill out the bulk of your community. And the quiet moderates are quite happy to click on a downvote rather than get into the fray and say, hey, I think that what you're saying is unreasonable.
Yeah, exactly. Good stuff. Well, I think that should probably just about do it for this episode. You got anything else to say about communities?
No, I mean, I could talk about Star Citizen.
We could easily talk about communities.
Oh god, please don't.
We could easily keep going for another hour, as per usual. Quick heads up to anybody who's sent us feedback in the last, few weeks. We are going to do a special response episode, basically, to questions that we've been asked. We've got quite a few from people over the last few weeks. Questions, comments, suggestions, all that kind of stuff. If you want to be part of that episode, if you want us to answer your question, etc., any question will do. Think of it as an ask us anything. Go for it. We're totally keen to answer any questions that you have. So we're going to do an episode, probably, I don't know whether or not it'll be an official episode or maybe just an aside kind of thing. But yeah, we'll be getting that out in, I don't know, a couple of weeks, a few weeks, next week.
Episode 30.5.
30.5. Yeah, how about that? That sounds good. All right, well, thank you very much for listening. As per usual, you can find us on the web at timandphill.com and on Facebook at facebook.com/timandphill. If you want to contact us directly, you can find Tim on Twitter at DungeonMaster, add him as a friend on Steam as Jaetus, or at his website, which is corsairsanchorage.com.
And as always, you can find Phil on Twitter at ToothSoup. Add him as a friend on Steam as Flaxehr, which is FLAXEH, or you can find him at his regular website, which is toothsoup.com. Thanks for listening.
And happy gaming.